Okay, let's begin. So, welcome everyone to the first Q&A session of this 10-day retreat. Who would like to get started?
Hello. Hi,
Hello.
Delson.
Hi.
May I ask a question now? So it's related to practicing during daily life first. So whenever I try to radiate loving kindness during the day, I see that my when I'm doing my daily task, it's not as efficient as I do. So how is it that I can practice in my daily life, but also not affect the efficiency of the work which I'm doing, be it studies or daily chores. So that is first question. Otherwise, it's when I don't practice, there is a lot of stress, and it's like I don't want to be in either extreme. So
Yeah. So, you definitely want to have balance. You want to definitely maintain some sort of a sitting practice, depending on your schedule, whatever works for you. It's always good to start with some kind of sitting practice in the morning, if you can do that, or at the start of your day, whenever that is. In your daily living, uh, you can just, when you have time, use whatever your Brahma Vihara is, whatever your object of meditation is, and meditate in that way, whether you're, of course, when you're walking or whatever else you might be doing. Now, if there's something that requires your attention, like studying or reading or writing an email or any other task like that, it wouldn't make sense to really use the object of meditation to be your main object of attention. You can still do work with a mind that is uplifted by loving kindness or uplifted by compassion or joy or whatever it might be. Generally, what I would recommend is if you're able to, you can do the Brahma Viharas with whatever you're doing, or you could just use the four foundations of mindfulness, which means whatever it is that you're doing, you have your entire attention on that task. You have the four foundations, that is body, feeling, mind, and phenomena. So in terms of the body, you can come back to the awareness of, you're sitting down, you're writing an email, you're studying, you're moving, you're walking, you're standing up, whatever it might be, any kind of posture that you might have. That allows you to center the attention to the present. So any meditation that you do in terms of the Brahmavihara meditation or mindfulness in general, it's all about putting your attention back to the present. So the Brahmaviharas are basically just an anchor for you to remain in the present while watching what's going on in terms of any hindrance that might arise in the mind, and then being able to acknowledge it and let it go. So you could use feeling, you could use sensation, meaning you can just be aware of any sensation that arises and passes away while you're studying, whatever that might be, in the way of your five physical senses or your mind. So if you notice that a thought is drifting you away from studying and the task at hand, then you can practice using the 6 R's. You can actually practice doing the four right efforts, which means you notice that your mind drifted away and you let go of that, come back to the mind and body, relax it, have a smile, and then get back to whatever it is that you're doing. And when it comes to mind, again, you're looking at what kind of mood is there in your mind, what kind of mindset is prevalent in your mind, and accordingly adjust. So if your mind is distracted, you can bring in some tranquility and collectedness by using the 6 R's And then when your mind is more centered, you can go back to the task. Phenomena really is about seeing the Four Noble Truths or the five aggregates as they arise and pass away. You can choose any subject you want, any object that you want, in terms of using it as a way to center yourself back and then bring your attention back. So let's say your task is to study. That will really be your object of attention. So if that's your object of attention, you don't want anything else in the mind except for your mind to be able to be open enough to see if there are distractions arising, at which point you use the 6 R's. But you use these methodologies as a way to come back to the present, coming back to the awareness of the body, coming back to the awareness of the senses or the feelings or the mental experience that you're having or the mind is having, or whatever it might be in the way of the four foundations, and then come back, continue on with your task.
Okay, thank you, Delson. So I'll practice this and I'll let you know.
Hi, Delson. I have a questions regarding letting go of clinging. Like as I notice myself, most of the time, yeah, like you realize it at a craving, stage, and it's a little bit easier to let go and then completely gone. What comes to that sometimes is you missed it, and then now you're in the state that you're really clinging. Especially it's not a really big defilement per se, but day to day, oh, why did I make that mistake? That's something like that, like like looping it again and again, and then you realize that this is a clinging. Like, can you let us know how can you remedy a little bit? Thanks.
So clinging really is just these stories that the mind attaches to. It's just we have four kinds of clinging, so everybody understands. We have clinging to self-view, we have clinging to views in general, we have clinging to rites and rituals, and we have clinging to sensory experiences. And sensory experience can also include mental experience. So in this case, it could be thoughts about things. So what you have to notice is if you have clinging, you have to just take a pause. And it's a matter of just letting it go through the 6 R process. But what you're going to notice is because you've gone so far from craving into clinging, that it is something that uh, might be a little more challenging to let go of because you're already deep into proliferation. So we talk about, for example, yoniso manasikara. We talk about attention. So you have to go back to that principle of understanding where if you put your attention on something, it will feed that energy. So it will be the nutriment for whatever it is that you're thinking about, whatever you continue to put your attention on. As soon as you put your attention on it in the sense of recognizing that it's there, you use the 6 R's to let go of it and then come back to something else. Come back to the diametrically opposite of whatever it is you're thinking. That might be another useful way to deal with it. In other words, if you're thinking about some mistake you made, or you're thinking about something that you did that you shouldn't have, or whatever it is that you misspoke or misunderstood something, or whatever it might be, you recognize that you had that thought and that it's starting to build up all of these stories around it, this identity view and views and clinging to it. You'll come back to the mind and the body. So that's really the release steps. You take your attention away from that. Really pay attention to the mind and body. You relax the mind and body. You're relaxing the tension caused by the clinging. And instead of thinking about any mistakes you might have made, as an example. What's the diametrically opposite of that? Thinking about something wholesome that you did at that day. So if you're basically thinking about things that you did that were unwholesome or things that were just a mistake, you can just think about something that you did that was wonderful, that was good. Immediately, the wholesome, uplifting mind will gravitate towards it, because this seems to be more fun to think about than stuff that, is just feeling icky. So if you do that, then the mind's attention goes towards that, and it starts to let go of any unwholesome thoughts related to it. Ultimately, then you let go of that as well and come back to a more balanced
So in another word, like bringing up this yonito megnikara, right attention, that this will be a controller. Because like I noticed that in the craving piece, if you are mindful, your mindfulness is strong, it's very easy to let go of. So yeah, all right. Thank you so much.
Delson, you probably will hear me on a delay because our internet connection is terrible here. I'm in the same place that Sarah lives.
Okay.
My question comes out of your response to the previous question. I noticed you said the mind is more likely to gravitate towards the positive, wholesome mind state. But of course, I've heard many times from psychologists that we have a negativity bias. So do you feel there's something inaccurate about that, or you're talking in a different frame?
Yeah, I understand what you're talking about in terms of the negativity bias. It's a matter of reconditioning. So, in other words, there is a bias towards things that seem to be negative, or you go into a spiral. This is really what clinging is and being. You go into a spiral of negative thoughts, and then that spiral just becomes uncontrollable. So, as soon as you just put a stop to it, as soon as you just put a pause to it, it's a matter of effort. So that is why we're talking about right effort here. So I would say that the mind would gravitate towards something more positive if you really paid attention to it. So it's a matter of really putting in the effort of paying attention to the positive. Eventually, what will happen, at least in that moment or in those moments, when you're paying attention to those positive thoughts or to those positive uh, ideas or mindset, your attention is no longer on the negative. By doing that, first and foremost, you're letting go of the control that those negative thoughts might have on your mind, because you're no longer putting your attention there. But eventually, it's a matter of practice and effort. So the more you do it, the more you're going to recondition the mind. You're going to recondition the sankharas, the formations, to be able to make a choice to see clearly that the mind is drifting towards unwholesome, towards the negative. And because you keep reconditioning the mind and the formations to go towards the positive, the almost automatic reaction or automatic response will be to recognize, catch the mind in thinking a negative thought, letting it go, and then immediately coming to the positive. So it's not a quick solution. It is a matter of effort. It is a matter of practice and reconditioning.
Thank you. That makes perfect sense. I appreciate it.
Okay.
I have a question, Delson. Hi. So I noticed that sometimes when my mind is quite focused and there aren't many thoughts coming up, there's a sort of a subtle craving that starts to install itself in the, this is, you know, going quite nicely. And it seems to just sort of sneak in there. So I sort of catch it, but not really. And I get the impression that it then becomes like efforting, because I'm sort of holding on to the, ooh, it's quite nice. And so then I'm trying to observe that there's this efforting going on. I'm trying to release it, relax, come back, but it's almost as if there's some kind of spiral that's happening there. And I'm just wondering if you have any tips for how to deal with that. I see people smiling.
Well, I want to clarify in terms of what you're considering craving. Is it really the enjoyment of the meditation itself, or is it just craving in general?
I think there's an element of sort of wholesomeness there, but there's also the kind of holding on to it in the background that I think is what becomes the efforting. Yeah.
So you have to understand, and this comes through experience and just observing, how when you come into the practice of the jhanas and you're using, let's say, loving kindness or compassion or whatever it might be as your meditation object, that there will be waves of arising and passing away, which means, let's say you start off with loving kindness, you're going into the first jhana, you notice that the mind quiets down and doesn't have any more verbalizing going on. You go into the second jhana and the mind is more stabilized and there's joy arising out of being more collected. So there's already a change occurring in that sense. The mind has changed from being verbal to being more silent, having noble silence, as they call it. And then you come into the third jhana where the mind is even calmer and so on. But what you're going to notice is there will be waves of experience in whatever jhana you might be in. And these waves of experience are really clues for you to know that the experience in the jhanas are impermanent. So if you hold on to an experience, you're not going to continue on to what might be even a better experience or what might be even a deeper experience. So instead of holding on to it, just observe it and see it arising and inevitably passing away. That is just the nature of all things that are conditioned, including the experiences in the jhanas. The reason why you have these experiences in the jhanas is because of the right causes and conditions, namely the enlightenment factors of mindfulness, investigation, of collectedness, tranquility, and joy, and so on. And then, of course, your object of meditation, the placing of the attention. All of these are conditions that allow you to experience that. So if you just have that understanding and you see that the experience continues to change, even though it might be quite minute, or it could be pretty perceptible, either way, it is still changing. With that in mind, you can start letting go of trying to hold on to that experience and realize that there will be more experiences to follow after this.
Yeah, so in a way, it's like noticing that it's going to, or understanding that it's going to change, and noticing that there is the clinging to the non-changing at that point, and
Yes.
just letting go of that.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. just a follow-up. Quite often I notice it also comes with some physical tension, usually in the neck. So what can I do about that?
That's a direct manifestation of that, kind of clinging of that tension. So if you notice that, that's a very good thing. You just have to intend the relaxation. You have to just intend it to loosen up and to relax the tension. When you do that, you're letting go of any attachment to that experience or any craving for that experience. And then you come back to the object. So it's really a matter of, again, utilizing the 6R process in that way. So if you do notice the tension, that means there is craving present. There is some kind of hindrance present, whether that's aversion or craving or restlessness or slat and torpor or doubt, whatever it might be. The manifestation of that can present itself as tension or any other kind of pain in the body as well.
Okay.
Delson, may I ask another question? So, like, so I just want to clarify my own understanding of the practice. So it's like whatever is happening, like if I'm not on my object of meditation and if there is any distraction, it's always about getting back to the 6 hours rather than thinking and trying to resolve it by thinking. It's always about using the 6 hours and getting back to whatever you're doing and then proceeding from there to the whatever needs to be done rather than trying to find a solution by thinking and trying to push it away. So that more or less covers the practice, right? In a way.
Yes, that's correct. So, if you try to note what the distraction is, what you're doing is you're feeding it more because of your attention. So the whole purpose of this practice is to acknowledge it. So there's a balance between completely ignoring it or having absorption, in which case you are not even aware that the hindrance has arisen, and seeing it and then using your mind to see through it, think about it, analyze it, and reflect it. So these are not part of the practice. What's happening here is you're acknowledging that the hindrance has arisen. By doing so, you're actually using that as a tool. You're using the hindrance as a tool to come back to the present, because as soon as you recognize that the hindrance is there, then that means that you are back here in the present. You're aware of what's going on. Then you come back to the mind and the body. By doing that, by returning or releasing your attention from the hindrance and coming back to the mind and body, you're no longer feeding that object, that hindrance, and it just fades away. And then you do the rest of this process and then come back to the object.
Yes. And another question about mindfulness, it's all about closely observing what is happening in the mind, right? Like that's what mindfulness is all about.
Yeah, mindfulness is described as knowing where your attention is, where the mind's attention is moving. So mindfulness actually is twofold. You start off with mindfulness by placing your attention on something. The sustaining of that attention then unfolds into collectiveness, into the actual meditation practice. That's one part. Then the other part of mindfulness is to see how that attention moves, if it does move. And then that helps you then to discern, which is the process of investigating where the mind is, and then using that to let go through the 6R process.
Okay. Thank you.
Delson, I have to ask, I'm very curious. You said that if one is fully absorbed, then you're unaware that the hindrances have arisen. My understanding from, teachings of the past, and I know they are teachings of the past, is that in full absorption, the hindrances are not arising. And that's the point. You want a mind that is functioning. You want to experience a mind that's functioning without hindrances so that you can see what it's like. What would you say to that?
Yeah. So jhana, so we have to understand there's one understanding of jhana and there's one understanding of absorption, at least the way one understands it in this case. So jhana is really the mind which is centered or unified around its object. And there are no hindrances present, definitely. Even in the case of absorption, there are no hindrances present. But there's a difference between the absorption jhana and the jhana in which there is what I would call open awareness. In the case of absorption jhana, as has been my own experience and experience of other people that I've spoken with, is when you are absorbed, there's definitely no hindrances present. But what happens is when you come out of the absorbed state, the state of absorption, eventually the hindrances arise again, and they might arise with full force. And at that point, there's no way to really deal with them in a meaningful way of letting go. Here, the practice is really being able to be in jhana and having your mind unified and centered around the object, which would be a Brahma Vihara or whatever it might be. And so you're still in jhana because you have the enlightenment factors present, you have joy present, you have tranquility present, you have this collective mind, mindfulness, and so on. But the difference here is because the mind is quite alert in the sense that it has this larger sense of awareness, it can acknowledge and notice when a hindrance arises. The key here is to face the hindrance, not to block it or suppress it or not even notice it or ignore it. It's to understand what the hindrance is, because the hindrances allow the mind to know where its attachments lie, where its aversions lie, where any kind of disturbances are present. By doing that, you can actually let go of those attachments by letting go of those hindrances. So the 6R process or the 4 right efforts is about, number one, preventing any kind of hindrance from arising. And how that happens is as soon as you notice that hindrance arising or having arisen, you stop the flow, you stop the energy of it to continue to distract you. Then number two, when you abandon the hindrance, that happens when you release your attention from that hindrance and come back to the mind and body. And then you relax the tension in the mind and body that might manifest as a result of that craving or that hindrance. Number three is you generate a wholesome state. So in this case, you come back to a jhanic state. You bring up Brahma Vihara or you bring up the enlightenment factors. In fact, as you're doing the 4 right efforts, as you're doing the 6R process, you are actively bringing up the enlightenment factors through that effort. You don't really need to intend it. It just comes up on its own through the right effort. So in this case, the object of your attention, your meditation will be that Brahma Vihara or whatever it might be. And then the 4th right effort is to maintain the awareness, your attention on the object. So if you continue to maintain awareness of the wholesome state, you are basically still in jhana. And if you're not in jhana, it's only because you notice the hindrance or a hindrance has arisen. So this practice is all about being able to acknowledge the hindrances so you know the deeper attachments of the mind and start to let go of those. So by doing the relaxed step, for example, what you're doing is tranquilizing formations. and the formations are really the carriers of karma. They're the carriers of deep rooted beliefs and experiences from the past. And these are a result of the choices one has made in the past. So anytime you notice a hindrance, you're effectively dealing with old karma. And so you're letting it go, acknowledging it, understanding where the attachments lie, and let go. It might arise again because of the strength of that karma, because of the strength of that hindrance. But it's important to continually do this process, because as you keep doing it, you're eroding the formations, you're eroding the fetters and the attachments related to those hindrances.
Great. Thank you very much for your response.
Hi, Delson. Can you explain, probably you already did in many of your talks, but can you please explain again about the 3 elements of Nibbana?
Okay, yeah, the contact, the 3 types of contact related to
Yes.
the. So you have the signless contact, the undirected contact, and empty contact or void contact. And these are a result of having deeply understood the 3 characteristics of reality, or the 3 characteristics of existence, which is impermanence, dukkha or suffering, and anatta or not self. So when you start off in the practice, you get to a point, especially in infinite consciousness, where you start to notice different flickers and different movements of consciousness related to the senses. And they can manifest in different ways. So they're not always very consistent. It depends upon the formations related to those senses. And when you notice this, eventually you see that they're arising and passing away, that each iota of consciousness related to a sensory experience arises and passes away. This is direct seeing of impermanence of consciousness, of conditioned states. Eventually, as you're noticing this, it gets boring, it gets tiresome. And this is really dukkha, this is the suffering aspect. It's the unsatisfactory nature of all unconditioned things. Then you also notice that there's no control of it. You're not actually the one. There's no self there that is actively arising and passing away, or controlling this process of arising and passing away. So you see anatta. This process deepens in terms of your insight into this when you start to get into what is known as the signless collectedness of mind. This can happen after long periods of practice or after a certain time. And this is really the border point between the 8th jhana of neither perception and non-perception, and cessation of perception and feeling. And it's called the signless state because of the reason that the mind becomes so disenchanted becomes so dispassionate, so uninclined towards any object, because it knows all objects are basically are impermanent, that it doesn't take anything as an object. And so the experience is like just seeing, just pure seeing. It's much deeper than the quiet mind one might experience. And this is sort of an understanding of the fact that all things that are conditioned are impermanent. Once you have this understanding and you have an experience of Nibbana, this is mentioned in a few places, in the Kamavu Sutta, in, I believe, the Majjhima Nikaya of 43 or 44, the discourse on the question and answers. One of those, or maybe both. But it talks about how there's three types of contact that arise when the mind emerges from Nibbana, emerges from cessation, perception, and feeling. And there's these three types of contact that happen with mind and the Nibbana element at that point. And that is the signless contact. And the signless contact means that nothing is taken as an object. There's no attaching the mind to an object. The undirected or uninclined comes from a direct understanding of suffering. So there's no desire for mind to attach to anything. It's completely free of any kinds of attachment. And then the empty contact, or the void contact, is understanding that all things, including the Nibbana element, are not self. So it's just void of any attachment of self to it. When this contact arises, it gives rise to formations that are very pure. And when I say very pure formations, it means that those formations are not what you would call abhisankhara. There is sankhara, and abhisankhara are the karmic formations that are fettered by continual craving, fettered by continual taking something personal, fettered by continual ignorance. So in this case, those formations don't arise because it has just made, the mind has just made contact with Nibbana. So any formations that do arise are uninclined. They have no craving in them. They are empty. They have no sense of self in them, no conceit in them. And they are completely purified by wisdom, by seeing this process as impersonal. These formations give rise to that consciousness, which is known as that unbounded consciousness. That doesn't mean it's an eternal consciousness or some kind of grand, perfect consciousness. It's just that the consciousness is not established in any concepts yet. It's not established in any concepts for craving or for any concepts for a sense of I to arise. This consciousness then gives rise to the experience of the feeling, which is the relief. That relief that you experience, there is where the mind can attach itself with craving. The mind can attach itself with a sense of I, with a sense of self, that I am feeling this relief, or I really like this relief. I want more of it. That's where then the fetters come into play, and then the next set of formations that arise will be fettered depending upon one's response to that relief. Or not. One can just completely let go of the relief, not have any craving or conceit towards it, and become an arahant.
Thank you so much.
So, Guru, I would like to have the questions on behalf of my meditator, because just last week, they finished the retreat with me and one the meditator. Now, when she, like, for example, she covered the blanket and then she can see the leg under the blanket. And she asked me why it's happening like that. She can see through the blanket. So I don't want to say you have the psychic ability. I just want you to tell me a better explanation.
Yeah. So if I understand correctly, she was able to see through the blanket with her eyes closed, meaning she just was able to see uh, while she was still meditating or after she
Yes,
came out?
yes. No, while she was in meditation and with the eyes closed.
What was her, uh, where was she in terms of the meditation? What was her, where was she in terms of the jhanas, or what was her experience?
Actually, she already have a few times cessation. So after the cessation, she got those experience.
Okay. So there is a possibility that what's happening is she's starting to open up the eye, the the divine eye, as they call it. She's starting to. That doesn't mean she's developed it, but she's starting to get an experience of it. And this can happen with meditators where certain formations become strengthened that are related to psychic faculties, related to certain higher knowledges, and so on. But it's up to her whether she wants to continue to develop that practice, because it can be just a one-time thing. It could just, or just a few times, because the mind has become so deep, the mind has become so collected that it's just starting to awaken all of these different higher knowledges. But there has to be some kind of inclination towards it. So even when we talk about, for example, the threefold knowledge, if somebody was to practice it, it's a directing of the mind. It sounds to me like she sort of, for lack of a better word, stumbled into it. So it just sort of opened up for her, and she was able to look into it and be able to see that. But that does not mean that the psychic faculties have fully awakened. And of course, you need more verification in terms of being able to understand if she can really process it and if it's really happening to her, or if it's just a state that's happening within her mind for that period of time.
So should I ask her just ignore it? Just ignore what's happening and using the 6 hour, or just let it make it naturally?
Yeah, let it evolve naturally. It depends where she is on her path and what her inclinations are. There are some people on their path who have attained a certain level, and they have a mindset to continue to incline towards activating certain faculties, activating certain types of uh, powers and things like that. But the best, and I always say this, the best power is the destruction of the taints. So I would guide her towards using that ability to destroy the taints. So does anybody have any more questions? We have still some time. Okay, everyone seems quite satisfied, so let's share some merit.
Be sufferance once, be sufferance free, and the feast trust fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisitions of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you, Delson.
Thank you, Guru.